The next few videos cover case studies of different kinds of locomotor adaptations in mammals. The first case study is of ungulates and cursorial locomotion. Ungulates is a term that's applied generally to two orders of mammals, the Perissodactyla and the Artiodactyla. Now it's important to note that these are not a formal taxonomic grouping. If we look at a phylogeny of mammals, we find the artiodactyls and perissodactyls in this area. The perissodactyls are things like horses and zebras, which are this grouping. And then we have the Artiodactyla in this grouping, and their sister taxa, the Artiodactyla, are the cetacea, the whales and dolphins. So putting together the Perissodactyla and the Artiodactyla, that's not a monophyletic group, but we do, for convenience, refer to them as ungulates because morphologically they're very similar. They have shared features related to their diet. They're all herbivores, and we talked a lot about herbivory and the adaptations that go along with that in terms of digestive tract and dentition. And they also share a lot of adaptations related to moving around quickly in a terrestrial environment or being cursorial. So two of the things that we see in both groups are syndactyly and having hooves. Syndactyly refers to having multiple digits encased within the same connective tissue so that they look like a single digit. If we look at the Perissodactyla first, those are commonly known as odd-fingered ungulates. And if we look at their toes, we see that there's either a single digit, as we see in the horses and zebras and things like that, a single digit that bears the weight of the body, or there are 3 digits that bear the weight of the body, and most of it is along this third central digit. So these are called mesaxonic feet, where the weight is borne mostly by a single digit or entirely by a single digit in the middle of the leg structure. If we look at the Artiodactyla, it's very similar. These are called the even-fingered ungulates. So the main difference is that instead of having a single structure going down the entire foot that bears the weight of the body, there are 2 digits that bear the weight of the body, or sometimes 4, but for the most part, it's the 3rd and 4th digit that bear the weight of the body, and the others are just very small and not really involved in locomotion very, very much. So you see some examples here, the peccary, camel, and deer, and these are all examples of paraxonic feet, so where there's 2 digits that carry the weight of the body. At the end of these digits, in both the perissodactyls and artiodactyls, is a hoof that's formed of keratin, which is very much like our fingernails and our toenails. And that's a strong structure. It's very enlarged, and that's what actually comes in contact with the substrate. Now, cursoriality evolved about 65 million years ago as the land masses were drifting apart and climate was changing on each of those land masses. And these mammals found themselves in situations that were getting warm and dry. So there wasn't a lot of vegetation that they could hide in. So the habitat became much more open. And instead of being able to hide from predators that were also evolving at that time, they evolved large body size and long legs that could carry them away from potential predators at a really rapid pace. So these are species that are very much adapted for running quickly in a terrestrial habitat. So at this point in the lecture, in usual years, we do a demonstration where I ask for volunteers from the class. And unfortunately, we won't be able to do that this year, although you can try maybe doing it at home yourself to see that it works. But basically, we would do comparisons of the effect of increasing stride length, so how big a step you take, and increasing stride rate, how quickly you take those steps on speed. So to go faster, one way you can do it is to take a bigger step. And structurally, there are several ways that species accomplish being able to take a longer step. One is to lengthen the limbs. And so we looked at this already once before. The ungulate species are the ones that we're talking about. And what you can see is that the entire leg structure becomes longer as you lift more of it up off the ground. So if you compare animals with if you scale the leg bones to be the same size, the longer limb comes when you pull the digits up off the ground instead of walking in a plantigrade fashion. So having longer legs means you can take longer steps, and that gets you where you're going faster. Another way that you can increase stride length is to get rid of the clavicle. The clavicle is part of the structure in the pectoral girdle that attaches the front limbs to the axial skeleton. And the tighter this connection, the harder it is for the animal to swing its leg forward to take a long step. So humans, for example, have a clavicle that keeps your arms pretty closely tied to your body. But if we look at an ungulate like this horse, it has a scapula, that's the shoulder blade, that attaches its front limb to the body, but it doesn't have a clavicle. So that means this connection is a lot looser, and the limb is actually able to swing forward all the way from the spine, so that instead of just swinging forward from this point, the horse can reach forward and take a much bigger step than it could if it had a clavicle that tied its front limb closely to its body. Another thing that we see is dorsoventral flexion of the spine. So we talked about this a little bit when we talked about how reptiles move versus how mammals move. So the reptiles wiggle back and forth, and that's not as efficient in terms of coupling breathing to motion. Dorsoventral flexion also helps increase stride length over wiggling from side to side. So dorsoventral flexion means that the animal curves its spine in one direction as it's stepping out to take a big step, and it curves its spine in the opposite direction, kind of making it convex here, as it gathers up to take the next step. So that makes it kind of like a slinky that's curving up, curling up, and then springing out. And it makes a huge difference in the length of the step that it's allowed or that's able to take.
Well, the first thing that really strikes me, it's just absolutely beautiful footage where you can see in incredible clarity what the cheetah is capable of. There's a number of key elements here, and one of the most important ones is this spine. So the spine of the cheetah is proportionally the longest and the most flexible of any large cat species. And that's really, really important because it enables the cheetah to maximize the stride length. By bunching and coiling the spine alone, it's able to expand this incredible stride rate, which you see.
Look at his back. Watch the back.
So that video was of a cheetah, not an ungulate, but the visualization of how the spine goes through dorsoventral flexion is the same for ungulates, and the cheetah is also a species that is adapted for cursorial locomotion. So they share a lot of commonalities. This is a link back to the picture we looked at before about how the lungs are not able to stay inflated in synchrony with motion in reptiles, but that this dorsoventral flexion of the spine aids in respiration in time with locomotion for cursorially adapted species, and that's true for ungulates as well. The next adaptation for increasing speed is increasing stride rate. So how quickly the animal can move its limb through the circuit of reaching forward and touching the ground and then pushing off. One of the keys to this is to have more joints in the limb. So in the demonstration that I used to do with the class, we'd have one person running across the class, moving all their joints in their legs normally, while the other person had to move with very stiff legs as if they had no joints in their limb. And of course, the one who was able to bend their legs was always won those races. So the way this plays out in biomechanics is if you look at how each of the limbs touches the ground and connects to the body, in unguligrade species, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 joints before you get to the ground. Whereas in a plantigrade species, 1, 2, 3, there are fewer joints that the limb can cycle through. So what that means is that an ungulate can take a much quicker step rotating its leg through the entire range of motion than a plantigrade species can. Another thing that allows the limb to move more quickly is to reduce the weight that occurs at the very end of the limb. So the foot or the hand in an ungulate, all those bones have been reduced down to just a couple of bones, and a lot of the musculature has been lost. So loss of digits makes those limbs lighter, and structures, in particular the ones associated with side-to-side or lateral movement, are gone. So the legs can only move forward and back. They're only moving in one plane, but that simplification makes them much lighter, and they can do what they do more quickly and more efficiently. Going along with that, the muscles that control the limb are bunched up close to the body core, so in the shoulder area and in the hindquarter area, as opposed to being distributed down the limb. And that again makes the limb itself much lighter and able to move much more quickly and efficiently. There are a couple of other specializations of tissues that are associated with cursoriality, especially in herbivorous species. So the nuchal ligament is attached to the cranium and attached to the spinal cord at the base of the thorax and basically supports the neck. And this is necessary in herbivores especially because they have really big heavy heads for grinding up plant material, and they have to carry and balance that head as they're moving around really quickly. So the nuchal ligament helps support the head without using muscular effort. The final specialization is called the springing ligament, and that's associated with the final joints of the limb. And especially in artiodactyls, it helps as the animal steps down, its hooves spread apart, and that stretches the springing ligament, and it conserves energy because as the animal picks its foot up off the ground, that ligament contracts and the limbs sort of spring off the ground, so it makes it much more efficient for the animal to walk. That wraps up the ungulate lecture, and I'll see you back for another case study.